Gainesville, Florida, spring of 1995. The mist crept slowly across the mirror-like surface of the unknown lake, as if trying to hide something that was never meant to be seen. The spring sun had barely begun to warm the sky when James and Matthew, longtime friends and inseparable weekend fishing partners, parked the old pickup truck at the edge of the dirt road. The lake wasn't on any map. It was one of those places only spoken of in whispers, between sips of beer and uncomfortable silence on the porch. "I heard the fish here are huge," said Matthew, trying to sound excited, though his eyes were fixed on the twisted branches that reached out like claws from the dark shoreline. James gave a faint smile, but his instincts told him otherwise. There was a stench in the air, not of dead fish, but of something older, deeper, something wrong. They came to fish during the day and hunt at night, but what they didn't know was that they were about to become the hunted. Beneath the lake, something was waiting, and it already knew their names. The inflatable boat cut through the still waters with an unsettling slowness. James cast his line with precision, but the hook barely touched the water before vanishing into the liquid darkness. There was no reflection of the sky there, only shadows. Matthew, on the other side, kept watch on the surroundings. The forest felt alive, not because of the wind, but because of something deeper. A kind of presence you couldn't see, but that pressed on the air like the weight of an ancient secret. Suddenly a sound, a sharp crack, a branch breaking. They both turned toward the shore, where the trees bent as if they were listening. Nothing. Absolute silence. The kind of silence that isn't natural. It's forced, as if even sound itself was afraid to exist there. "Maybe some animal," James murmured, but Matthew's eyes were fixed. There was a figure among the trunks, still, very still. It was dark, tall, unmoving and featureless. When he blinked, it was gone. Matthew said nothing. Not yet. Later, at the makeshift camp by the lake, they pitched the tent and lit a fire. The flames flickered, but the warmth did not chase away the strange cold that crept from the forest. It was as if the entire place was being watched by hundreds of invisible eyes. Then came the first scream. Not from an animal, it was human, but there was no one else for miles. They looked at each other. "Did you hear that?" Matthew asked, his voice shaking. James just nodded, his eyes locked on the forest. The night had only just begun, and the lake seemed to be waking up. The campfire crackled, but the warmth was useless. The cold surrounding James and Matthew didn't come from the wind. It was a damp cold, rising from the earth itself, as if the lake were breathing, freezing everything around it. They decided not to sleep. Matthew, always the more impulsive one, grabbed his hunting shotgun and checked the shells. James did the same with his .38 revolver. Both were experienced with trails and hunts. It wasn't their first time hearing strange noises in the woods, but it was the first time they felt fear. At 2:23 a.m., the silence was broken by footsteps. They didn't run, they didn't try to hide. They simply stood up in silence, aiming their weapons into the darkness. The footsteps continued, but nothing appeared. It was as if the forest was toying with them, approaching, retreating, circling. And then it appeared. A tall, misshapen figure with hollow eyes and no trace of humanity. It looked like it was made of mud, rotting leaves, and dried flesh. It stood just 10 meters away. Matthew fired. The shotgun's blast echoed through the woods. The creature staggered, but didn't fall. James fired 3 times. Nothing. It advanced, floating as if it didn't touch the ground. Matthew tried to reload, but the shotgun slipped from his hands as if something had knocked it away. James felt a jolt in his arm, and his weapon was flung into the woods, even though no one had touched him. They ran. They had no choice. They plunged into the forest, tripping over roots, fleeing the sound that followed them. Not footsteps, but voices. Voices that weren't human. They were whispers rising from underground, repeating ancient, incomprehensible words filled with rage. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, they were covered in mud, and in front of them, a cabin, old, decaying from time. It wasn't on any map, but it was there, as if it had been waiting for them. Matthew hesitated. "This is insane," he muttered. But James, even with his heart pounding out of rhythm, took a step forward, and the door opened by itself. The door opened with a drawn-out creak, like an old sigh too ancient to have a voice. Inside, the darkness seemed to have density. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a presence. James took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold. Matthew followed, his eyes scanning the rotting, dust-covered interior of the cabin. The floor groaned, the ceiling dripped with slow leaks of blackened moisture. The windows were sealed shut with thick planks, yet some strange, bluish, faint light seemed to seep from the cracks in the floorboards. And then they heard it. "You came searching too." The whisper came from all directions. It wasn't a living voice, more like an echo imprinted in the walls, as if the wood itself was screaming out memories. James aimed his flashlight toward the back of the cabin. There was a table with old papers, documents, letters, newspaper clippings. Matthew stepped closer and began to read aloud, trembling. "Search expedition, 1956. 4 missing, Grant Lake. Witnesses report lights and night screams. Area sealed off. 1969. 2 bodies found without skin, eyes removed. No animal identified. 1977. 3 hunters vanish without a trace." A chill crept up James's spine. They were at the heart of something ancient, something that didn't want to be uncovered. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. Their flashlights flickered. The temperature plummeted. And in the corner of the room, the figure. It was there again, more defined now. Parts of its face were visible. A man partially deformed, with eyes as black as coal and a smile stitched shut with rusty wire. His arms were too long, and from his fingers dripped a black liquid that sizzled as it hit the floor. Matthew tried to scream. James tried to reach for the fallen revolver, but neither could move. They were frozen, not from fear, but by something invisible holding them still, as if the cabin itself had swallowed them whole. The figure then pointed to the floor, the spot where the bluish light escaped through the cracks. James, trembling, fell to his knees and pried up a floorboard. Beneath it, a stone staircase leading down into the earth. And the smell, the stench of rot and sulfur. James lit the lighter. The flame trembled as if it were afraid. He exchanged a glance with Matthew. Both were determined. With weapons in hand, they slowly descended the stone steps, each one creaking like bones being crushed. The darkness was thick, almost solid, and the air below tasted of iron and dead flesh. They reached an ancient stone corridor with strange carvings on the walls, circular symbols with twisted human figures, sewn mouths, gouged out eyes. There were claw marks on the stone. Someone or something had tried to escape from there. Farther ahead, a wooden door. Behind it, whispers, many of them speaking together in a language neither of them recognized. James, with a trembling hand, pushed the door. And then they saw an altar made of bones. Bodies stacked, dry like mummies, eyes wide open, as if they were still witnessing what had killed them. In the center, a chained figure kneeling with a leather hood nailed into its head. The body pulsed, though it remained still. Matthew stepped closer, but the creature slowly turned its head, facing them even with no visible eyes. And then, in a guttural voice, it whispered, "You brought light. Light does not enter here." All the flashlights and the lighter extinguished at the same time. Screams, laughter, scratching on the stone. Gunshots, useless. James fired 3 times into the darkness, hearing the shots echo, but nothing fell. Matthew shouted his friend's name until he felt a cold hand touch his shoulder. He turned around, and everything went black. When Matthew woke up, he was by the edge of the lake, alone, covered in mud and dried blood. The boat was gone, and in the middle of the water, right at the center, James, standing still, his eyes completely black, and the same smile sewn shut with wire.